Welcome. My name is Sam Bardarek. I'm the chair for the Pennsylvania Library Association Teaching, Learning, and Technology Roundtable. I'm happy to introduce our speaker for today, Karen Rege. With over 20 years as experience as a college administrator, Dr. Rege currently serves as the Dean for Information and Innovation at Harford Community College in Bel Air, Maryland, where she oversees both the library and the e-learning departments. Karen holds a master's in library and information science from Drexel University, a master's in historical musicology from the University of Michigan, and a doctorate in educational leadership with a specialization in educational technology from the University of Delaware. Previously held positions include developing and leading the library for Delaware College of Art and Design and serving as the director for library services at Delaware County Community College for 12 years. In addition, she taught the inaugural online version of the Academic Libraries course in Drexel's master's program and currently teaches educational technology courses online for Fairmount State University in West Virginia. She is the recipient of a NISOD Award for Excellence in Teaching and Learning and was a finalist for the Athena International Award for Women in Leadership. Karen presented Learning Commons, Re-envisioning the 21st Century Academic Library at the 2013 Pennsylvania Library Association Conference, and is frequently invited as a guest speaker on technology in libraries and higher education in general. Please welcome Dr. Karen Rege.
Well, thank you and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see some familiar names in the group here. I'm so happy to be able to be back with Pennsylvania Library Association, even if it's just for a few minutes. And I send you my greetings from down here in the rolling hills of Maryland, just south of the Susquehanna River. So many of you may know right where we are. We do back up to the southern border of Pennsylvania. And so I was asked to speak today to talk a little bit about technology and changes in technology in libraries. Particularly, I'm going to focus on academic libraries. So if there's anyone here from K-12 or from the public library system, I send my apologies in advance, although I'd be happy to have some conversations with you too. I've been getting into the whole world of K-12 as well through our partnerships with our local public school system, and then again in working with pre-service teachers in the educational technology class that I'm teaching. So I'm going to start out with my slideshow today, and hopefully you can see this. And as Sam said, I'm going to try to make this interactive if possible here. And so there'll be opportunities for you to both chat and to speak live and to participate as well. So let's see if I can get this to move. There we go. So I've always loved traveling by train ever since I was a kid. And in September 2019, my husband and I took a trip to northern Vermont during the foliage time. And it was wonderful, just gliding along the Connecticut River, listening to some relaxing music with a glass of wine, looking at the foliage. And I suddenly realized that the train is really more than just functional transportation to move you from one place to another. It's really all about the journey. And I think the same is true for technology in academic libraries. And as we know, our journey has sometimes been fast and sometimes been more leisurely, but there's always been movement from one place to another as technology has developed over time. So here's an example of what I mean. This is the Alden Library in Ohio University. And on the left, you see a picture from circa 1980. And now on the right, you see a more contemporary picture. And so if you would kindly put into the chat, and I'm hoping I can actually see the chat, some of the things that you notice about the changes here. Just put in the chat, what do you see in the changes between the two pictures? All right, I'm seeing no books, computers replace the stack, newspapers, computers, more group study, yes. Round and less linear. All right. So, and actually, I think the pictures are from pretty much the same location, maybe different angle, because if you notice here, you can see the stack lights in the picture on the right that are still there, the in the upper left corner, the lights that are going sort of horizontal, I guess, in the picture here, where they would have run down the length of the stacks. So yes, not so many books, lots of more open collaborative spaces, yes. And I think that we are seeing a lot of this change because if you look in the picture in the right, pretty much everywhere you see a computer, with the exception of maybe just that one person over on the right. So how do we get from one place to another? So, you know, many of these changes are a result of the technology journey that we've sort of been on in the last nearly 4 decades. So in this presentation, I'm going to give you a little bit of a historical overlook of where we've come in case there's some folks who are newer in their careers in libraries, and then some ideas of where I think we might be headed in the future. And then I actually have 3 questions for us to get some of this discussion going. So let's start on our little trip down memory lane here. And so historically, libraries were really all about creating these large collections and organizing the collections and then being able to find and retrieve the items. So if we talk about that in terms of technology, I would say that the technology train left the station in the early 1980s with the rise of digital catalogs, what we today would probably call our integrated library systems. And the first to come on really was that cataloging. And I think many of us, or some of us at least, may remember when we had to do the conversion from the old card catalog with the drawers and the little card files over into the digital version. And we just thought that was the cat's meow, to have control in terms of catalog and putting that online. And then we got adventurous and started looking at how our serials were coming into us regularly and how we needed to get control over that. Then we looked at how we were lending materials between libraries. And finally, we started working with how we were buying materials. And now I think most of us purchase our materials directly through the acquisitions module in our ILS, which goes directly to the vendor. So we've come a long way in that respect. From the public end, there was the online public access catalog, or the OPAC. And so I'm going to have some of you who were working in libraries prior to the 1990s, mid-1990s, reminisce a bit and see, do you remember when there were terminals for the OPAC that were just the computer screen and the keyboard? And I don't even think we had mice back then. I think it was just the screen and the keyboard, and there was no computer. They were all run from a central mainframe that were connected by a big mess of wires. And then we started building these databases where we were, I know as a researcher, when I was working on my master's degree in music, I was so excited to have a database so I didn't have to go look up the journal articles that I needed in printed volumes. So we first got the databases as CD-ROMs, at least those are the ones that I remember. I was at Drexel University at the time, and I remember being on the pilot project with Encyclopedia Britannica, getting that in a CD-ROM and then trying to load it on the mainframe so we could push it out and it could be accessed from the OPAC terminals. And then later we got all of the databases on CD-ROMs and had to again load them on the mainframe, or else load them separately into each computer if you actually had a computer at the terminal. So those were the good old days here. Let's see what some people say here. Oh, thank you, Steve, for putting some information here in the chat about some early ILS systems. Yes. Notice, oh, how we loved all of those. Yep. And then what happened? And then the internet came and changed everything. And I was actually in library school as it happened and watched a lot of things develop. So I'm actually going to put something in the chat here. And again, we're going to reminisce a little bit or think for a little bit. How did the internet actually change libraries? And so I've put a link to sorry, I think I meant to put this to everyone here. A link to a Padlet. And if you've not been on a Padlet, they're kind of fun. They're sort of a whiteboard where you can, or a board where you can post little sticky notes. And so actually I will stop sharing this screen and share that screen so that we can all see as this comes up here. Let me see, share the screen. So if you go to the link, and I'll give you a minute to do this, down in the right-hand corner, there is a little plus sign, and you can click on that and type in some things that you think about how the internet changed libraries. So I'll give you a minute to play with that a little bit, and we'll take a look at what we came up with. No, it'll take people a minute to navigate there, so. Oh, more control to the end user, yes. Ooh. Yes, putting the power with the patrons, love it. Oh, Z.39, oh my goodness. I remember those days. More access to full text, oh yes. When we could actually get the full text of the article, not just get the citation. Oh, that was wonderful. Because if I remember correctly, even the early databases didn't have full text. They just had the citation. And then you had to go run down and get them ILL still. All right. So I came up, I mean, there's still a few more coming in here. While they're coming in, I'll share with some of the things that I came up with. One of the things that was very interesting for me is that you could now search catalogs remotely. So I'm going to stop sharing this and go back to my slideshow here. And so you could share catalogs remotely and search them remotely, which was great. So I remember sitting in my office and searching my public library catalog to see if there was a book I wanted to check out. So I thought that was something that we couldn't do prior to the internet. We also obviously had greater access to the databases, again, and including the full text, which was revolutionary. And then we got into these things called federated searches. I don't know if anybody remembers that pilot project where we were trying to search across databases, but at that point you could only search by controlled language or controlled vocabulary. And we were running into issues because we know how the database companies do not always play nice in the sandbox. And so they didn't use the same terminology. And so there were challenges if they didn't use the same lexicon or same dictionary that to be able to, so you could search across. But then we got into the discovery tools that did allow the keyword searching. And in that, we also were able to link in not just our books and our journal articles, because we could now add in the whole catalog. So that also meant we could include videos, the things that we had for ebooks and our digital video collections and all those other things that happened. And then finally, I think that one of the other ways that the internet really changed the way we do business as librarians and academic libraries is email and chat reference. And so I remember I was working in Pennsylvania, and I think it was 2008, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but right about then, we became members of what was originally called Ask a Librarian, and now I believe it's called the Power Library, and I see you've added chat to it as well, and a few other, and text. Not chat, just text. You've added text to that since then, since 2013 when that moved there. So those are some of the things that happened with the rise of the internet. So let's fast forward a little bit and talk about more recent times. And so more recently, we've seen that as technology has evolved, in some ways, the equity gap has grown wider between the haves and the have-nots in terms of technology. And I know it's particularly true for community colleges, where we often see folks who are on the have-not side of the fence. But in general, and this includes, I think, our friends at the public libraries as well, the library was seen as a place to come and access computers. And yes, often there were computer labs on campus, but we also in the library created a lot of computer labs ourselves and just had open computers, primarily because it made it easier for us to work with the patrons right there. So it was great for a reference librarian to finally be able to go sit down next to a patron and see what they're working on, help them with their research right there on a computer in the library. And then we see the rise of mobile devices. And so I know in the past, when we were looking at building a learning commons, we were having a lot of discussion about how many computers do we actually put in, and then how much do we put in terms of places to connect mobile devices like laptops and tablets. And so we actually created spaces that were sort of like restaurant booths that had a monitor at the end of it, so that we could plug in their laptop and then share what was on their screen if you were working on a group project. And then because we had so many mobile devices, we also had to loan out other things like digital cameras or webcams, microphones, headphones, noise canceling headphones, things like that. And now most of those devices also needed Wi-Fi. So the library became a place to come and get Wi-Fi, not just for your laptop, but also if you had a cell phone and things like that. We still see, unfortunately, the digital divide. And so I think even though we have less of the need for regular computers, at least that's what we're seeing at our institution here, that we're finding that the regular desktop computers are not being as heavily used, and that there are a whole lot more students coming in with mobile devices. But I think there's still some room for growth, and that happens particularly in the wireless. And that became very apparent, I think, during the pandemic. The need for libraries to provide wireless access. And I know many of the public libraries were providing hotspots for the student, or making wireless available in the parking lots of public libraries. Some academic libraries were doing that. And then we were also loaning out mobile hotspots, as I'm sure many of you were. And here's why. So this is a piece of data based on Microsoft's measure of internet access. So this is pretty recent. And you'll notice that there are some, you can see the outline for the state of Pennsylvania here. And you'll notice that there are different colors, and the darker the green, that is the closer to 100% of high-speed internet access among the general population. And the darker the red, the closer to 0 we are. So we don't have any that are 100% either in either direction, but you can see there's quite a spectrum, and white is actually at 50%. So you'll see that Chester, Montgomery, and Bucks County are doing pretty well in terms of the population having access to high-speed internet, while Susquehanna, Sullivan, Juniata, Fulton, and Forest are still relying, or still don't have a lot of high-speed internet access. And those students in those areas might need to rely more on Wi-Fi hotspots, or come to the library for access, or any kind of Wi-Fi that's provided within the library. So we also know that in the age of information, or the knowledge economy, we have also faced information overload thanks to the internet. So IL, information literacy, became a lot more important, I think, rather than just our usual bibliographic instruction. We really focused more broadly. And now with the technology and the ubiquity of the web, understanding how media is altered to portray certain views is also necessary for students to learn. So this whole concept of digital media literacy, and I'm sure you've all been out on YouTube and seen videos that are absolutely fake, or in my ed tech class, I've had students out searching for television ads that might have been altered. So again, which ones are truly fake? Yes, I've never seen an emu running on a treadmill and probably never will. But digital media and literacy is super important and becoming even more important. And so, also along with that is the creation and the content, particularly in academia. So we see the rise of these digital media labs happening where students come and have to be able to develop videos themselves or edit audio or things like that for their coursework. So we also started to see the rise of these digital media labs. We actually have something here called a one-button studio where the students can walk in the door, literally plug in their flash drive, stand in a certain spot and hit a button, and all the lights come on and you can start recording. And when you are done, you hit the button and it writes automatically to your USB drive in MP4 format. And there's a green screen so you can go back and later edit it and put whatever background you want in behind it. So in some ways it sounds pretty simple, but the understanding how to edit that in the back end is not so simple. And so one of the things that we need to think about in libraries is, again, is this our role to support students who are working in this area? And we've also seen students, again, on the other side of the digital divide. Not only do they not have access to these technologies or have the digital media literacy, so we've also developed things, for example, technology labs or sandboxes, as I call them. And we ended up with an LSTA grant when I was at Delaware County, and we built a lab where students who might be on the other side of digital divide and had never actually gotten their hands on something like an iPad could actually come in, because it was pretty new. iPads were pretty new at the time. They could come in and actually try one out, and there was someone there to explain it. So it was sort of modeled after the idea of the Apple Genius Bar. But the idea, again, was to help students understand the role of technology and digital media, because there was a number of digital media items in that sandbox lab as well, and to understand how to apply that in their classes and for their future needs in employment. So we also know that we've been through several iterations of students. So we have the millennials, defined as students born between 1981 and 1996. We're currently in the end of Generation Z, which is defined as 1997 through 2021. And the kids who will be born next year are going to be the beginning of Generation Alpha or Generation A. And we know, at least for the millennials and the Gen Z, they want everything right now, when they want it, where they want it, just in time services. And so I think that also affected the way we work with students in the library and the role of our libraries. So for example, self-checkouts. Many of us have moved to that feature, making it available. There are other things that have happened, like mobile device vending machines that allow students to check out laptops or iPads or things like that on their own, because they need the laptop at 2 o'clock in the morning and the library's closed. And then also chat reference is another one. I mean, obviously we've used chat reference a lot, and even text reference now, to help connect with students where they're at, when they're at. And then on the other side of this, on a positive note too, technology has also made it easier for us to gather data, particularly around usage statistics, use of the collection and our services. So affording us the ability to make data-informed decisions. So for example, we now gather reference statistics, not by doing hash marks on a piece of paper, but by using things like Desk Tracker or Gimlet. And then we've also collected stats, either head counts or collection uses, and often those are done with a handheld device. Even when we do inventory now of the collection, that's done with technology and a handheld device, not in the old days, the pre-internet days where you actually had to touch every book on the shelf. So what's coming up next? I think what in academic libraries, in order to understand what's coming about next, we might need to take a look at what's happening in teaching and learning and in higher ed overall. And so many of us are addicted to our Internet of Things, particularly the consumer part of Internet of Things, like our Fitbits or our personal digital assistants like Amazon, Echo, or Alexa, as we most fondly call her. Also, artificial intelligence. And that can have some very interesting implications in higher ed. And then also, I think, in the library. So I remember going to a conference back probably 2009 or 2010 and saw a really early prototype of an artificially intelligence-led reference desk. It was a chatbot reference, is what they called it. And this was using a knowledge base. They had programmed the software to be able to answer directional questions anyway. Now, again, the technology wasn't super sophisticated, but there was a lot of programming going on in the back end. Now, artificial intelligence has come a really long way, and I don't think we're that far out from actually having robots doing at least some of the reference part. We also know that there's 3D printers and other makerspace technologies. Many folks have put in a makerspace within their libraries, both in the academic side and also in the public library side, to encourage development and innovation. And the 3D printers, if you've not played with them, they're great fun, but they can have some really interesting applications. So for example, instead of, we don't have any 3D printers in the library, but we do in other spaces on campus. And so we have support for a nursing program, and the nursing students often come in from their anatomy and physiology class and have to see all the body parts, and they have these mannequins that they have to take apart. Well, what if they could print those mannequins or pieces of that themselves so that they could understand what bone fit with what bone? So there are a lot of applications for 3Ds. And again, feel free to put in the chat anything you can think of around those applications. And then I'm sure many of you have been involved in extended reality. And I think this is where we're going to see some of the greatest developments in learning and teaching in higher education. And when I say extended realities, that's a term that I first found used by EDUCAUSE, but there are other names for it. Some folks have called it immersive learning environments, although I think that's a little bit narrower. But what we're really talking about here is the virtual reality, the augmented reality, and the mixed reality. And so if you haven't played with any of those, I highly recommend that you do. Most of us have seen at least, simple things like the Google Cardboard headsets that you can put your cell phone in and see things in 3D. There are larger, more sophisticated systems that can do mixed reality or can do a lot more than just the virtual headsets, the Google Cardboard headsets, like the Oculus Rift and things like that. We have a number of them here between the library and the e-learning department, and they actually do sort of virtual reality fairs for both our students, which they had a couple of weeks ago, and then one for faculty. And so we're starting to see some of those applications happening in the classroom, particularly in the STEM area, both on the credit and the non-credit side of the house and in the technology area. So to give you an example, you can, one of the ones that we're looking at with the mixed reality, you can actually go around a volcano, go in a volcano, dissect the volcano, or if you're teaching engineering, aviation engineering, you can pick up an entire airplane engine out of the airplane, bring it into the room, rotate it, take it apart, things like that. And so it's absolutely fascinating. There's a lot of developments in this area. They've now been able to develop haptics, which means that you can actually feel instead of just seeing and then hearing normal sound. So for example, there are a couple of pilots that are happening right now where they are in medical schools, where they're teaching surgeons to do either dissection or to actually do surgery using a virtual scalpel, and they can actually feel the pressure of the knife cutting the skin. That's how sophisticated it's getting. And also they are now working on pilots with smell. So you can imagine what implications this is going to have for teaching and learning in the future. And so what happens if a student goes to a classroom and needs to use that material or those technologies outside of their classrooms? Where does that live? I mean, do we build areas in our libraries for students to come and work with those technologies? So just something to think about. And then a couple more that are coming up also, digital IDs. I know many of us use regular old-fashioned ID cards to check materials out of the library, but there are obviously some digital ones that are happening too, as well, that you can just walk up and your cell phone has the digital ID on there. I don't know if anybody's working with that yet or not. So there's some implications for libraries there. And then finally, blockchain. And if you haven't heard about blockchain, it's not surprising because it's used more in industry than in higher education. And we're kind of watching what's happening with that. And there are multiple uses for that in higher ed, but the one that would be closest to us is related to the comprehensive learner record. And that means what the blockchains are, you might have heard of it in terms of cryptocurrency. That's one end of it in one application. But they're really distributed ledgers. In other words, think of a database that can house all kinds of information. And so when you're looking at the comprehensive learner record, it's a record that the student owns, and they can access the database from their mobile device, usually a cell phone app, and they can see their entire transcript from every institution. They can see any certifications external. So if they have a Microsoft certification, if they have in cybersecurity or something along those lines, that can get pulled in. They can do badging. If you've implemented competency-based education, you can get right down into the actual skills in each class that can be badged. You can also, and this is where it could be applicable to libraries, badge the soft skills. And so if information literacy was part of the curriculum in certain areas, students could actually get a badge in information literacy or digital media literacy. So I think there's a lot that is coming up. And again, thanks to Steve here, who's putting some really exciting things in the chat. We'll have to talk a little more offline. Again, I always appreciate Steve. He was a teacher of mine way back when, we won't say how long ago, and a mentor, and I've always appreciated his great work. All right. And so with that, I'm going to open this up for some questions. So I have 3 questions for you. And we will spend most of the rest of the time working through these questions. So the first question that I have, and again, I think Sam is going to help me moderate here so that we can make sure that everybody who wants to participate can. So if you have something you'd like to share with us, please raise your hand and Sam will give you will call on you so that you can share with what you're thinking with the rest of us. So first of all is obviously budget. If we're working with technology, it requires funding. And so one of the things that I always end up struggling with is how do we balance the budgets between infrastructure expenses and patron needs expenses. So for example, I've only got a finite pot of money and I have to pay for things like my ILS and my RFID system I had to put in and my regular OCLC and all the databases in the collection. But I want to provide also the technologies that the students need, like the digital the mobile technologies and the hotspots and things like that they need to be successful. And I also want to innovate. And so what criteria do I use to guide my technology expenditures, knowing that we are likely going to hit an enrollment cliff in 2026. If you haven't heard about that, may want to dig into that a little bit. And that has to do with the number of kids that were actually born from 2008 to about 2012 or 13. And so there aren't going to be enough students in the actual pipeline coming into higher ed. So they're talking about the enrollment cliff hitting in 2026. And when enrollment goes down, most of us see our budgets go down. And most of us know that the libraries are often asked to cut their budgets. And so with all of that in mind, with the pending enrollment cliff and likely budget cuts, how do I balance out that infrastructure piece and the needs of the patrons and innovation? So big question here. I'm going to throw the floor open and see what we get. Oh, great. Daniel put academia next, the futures of higher education. Brian Alexander, yes. And I actually was in a presentation, the Maryland Library Association, your equivalent, had a conference this summer and actually had Brian Alexander come and speak. And then I also ran into him again. I'm part of Quality Matters, and we had a president and chancellor summit this summer, and he was there as well. The other book that I've been reading is a brand new book out by Scott Van Pelt from University of Pennsylvania and Arthur Levine from Columbia University, called The Great Upheaval. That's another one to take a look at too. No takers on this one, huh? All right, well, we'll move along then. Yeah, this is really a challenge. And for those of you who are in management positions or senior leadership positions, you're probably knowing what I'm talking about. Although I often engage all of my staff, especially my senior leaders in the library, around these discussions, like how do we really balance out this budget? Because with dwindling resources, it's going to be more of a challenge as we get forward. And so, you know, coming up with the criteria and the guide for expenditures is very helpful, I think, but, you know, so that we're making sure that we have the equity that we need for our students who may be on the other side of the digital divide, and we're supporting the teaching and learning environment. And we know that teaching and learning environment's likely going to have more technology. So we're going to have to make some decisions somewhere. So again, I would recommend having some conversations with folks at your home institution and trying to talk through what criteria you might be able to use. All right. So we all like to develop technology and pilot and try out new things. And we might put in some larger technology initiatives. But again, what framework do we need to implement those? So here, let me give you a couple of ideas of what I'm thinking. First, I mentioned the funding part in declining enrollment. And so often we go after a grant to get new technologies. And I've done that a number of times, going after LSTA grants, which are great, you know, get you started up and running. But then what? So how do you plan for that sustaining growth of, you know, your grant or any other funding that you get? So I've had some epic failures. Yes, at one point, we had an early project back in 2005 and 2006 where we were working with nursing students and we bought PDAs. Yes, I mean like BlackBerry PDAs back in the days before smartphones. And we loaded on a number of nursing books. And the reason we did this was because the students were in clinical settings, so they could actually not have to carry around this whole stack of really big books. They could just carry around their PDA. And if they had to do medicine calculations, or they wanted to educate the patient in some way, or they needed to look up something quickly, they could do it off of their PDA. But it was a failure in many ways. One, because we scared the bejeebies out of the students in terms of if they broke it or stole it or lost it or whatever. So they were hesitant to actually use it. And then the other part too is I don't think we got IT involved in early enough. And so the IT department wasn't prepared to troubleshoot when there were things that happened or when they needed updates. And so there were some takeaways for that for me as well. Like I didn't plan on how do I sunset a program like that? If you get something that's not working up as well as you would like, then how do you handle that? And then on the other side, what if you have something that's a wild success and you need to both scale it up or you need to replicate it? So for example, let's say you decide to go into a mobile device blending machine, mobile device vending machine, and it works really well. And then suddenly you have to put in not just one in the library, but you have to put 3 in the library and then start to put more on the other side of campus. So then how do you plan to sustain those? That's another question. And then what do you do when the technology becomes obsolete? You know, whether, especially with instructional technology and infrastructure changes. So, you know, we went from being hardwired to being wireless, right? So what happens if we get into another technology that makes even wireless obsolete? So you kind of have to go back to, why are you implementing this technology in the first place? And this is the key takeaway I always have for my students in my online ed tech class is, what problem are you trying to solve with the technology? So there's got to be some kind of problem that you're solving rather than just putting in technology for technology's sake. So go back to that and make sure that the technology that you're working with is related to teaching and learning. And then finally, engage the key stakeholders. So again, in my failure, I should have had more players from IT on in the beginning. And the other thing that I think you have to do is really, in order to get end user buy-in, really have some robust training available and a robust support system too. So if they need help, where do they go? So now we are developing a lot of tutorials and things, mostly learning from the colleagues over in our e-learning department who have had to help get the entire institution online when the pandemic hit. And so they have a structured approach to how they build tutorials. And so the library staff here has been working with them and learning how they do that. And so now we're starting to build tutorials as well. All right. Yes, I'm seeing a good collaborative relationship with IT. Plan this. Yes, that is very important. So thank you again, Steve. All right. And my final question for you all, which hopefully will be a little bit easier for you, is, and this one, hopefully you can put some things in the chat so that you all can get involved in discussing things. And that is, so how is technology continuing to change the role of our patron-facing librarians? So not so much the folks behind the scenes doing the cataloging and the ILL and the acquisitions or administration, but the true patron-facing. So is there anything perhaps that you were doing now that you were not doing in the 1980s or the 1990s if you were here, and because of the internet and things, and just in technology in general? How has that changed? It doesn't have to be specific library technology too. It can be any kind of technology. So how has that changed in general for you as librarians? So I'll give a minute here in the chat. Hopefully you can put some more things there. Okay, more remote service delivery, yes, especially with the online courses. Can you be more specific? Price is changing, collaboration is easier, yes. Anyone else? If you're a reference librarian, how has your role changed with technology? All right. Yes, 24/7 chat. It's gotten a lot better. So you can share the desktop. Yes, that's true. So I assume it's not just chat, or people are probably doing Zoom consultations or Teams consultations as well, video consultations, right? Yes. Patrons expect instant answers. That's correct. That's your millennials and your Gen Zs. Yes, communicating through multiple formats. Oh, yes. I heard, it broke my heart. I'm on the campus academic technology advisory committee, and we have a student a student on the group, committee member. And we were having a conversation, right, not too long after the pandemic hit. It was at the end of the spring semester. And she floored us all when she was a nursing student. And she said that out of the 5 classes that she took, she had to learn 5 different video platforms. And what kind of pressure does that put on the students, right? So yeah, it's hard. Yes. More teaching resources from what are used in high school. Yes, or university. Yep. So I was actually thinking a little bit in more broader terms. And so hopefully you'll keep sending them in, except good enough resources. Yep. But here's some of the more broader things that I was thinking about. First is the general tech support. So how many of you have had to help a student with a printer that is connected to the network, right? Or explaining formats, file formats, you know, like what's an MP4, you know, that sort of thing. How to use tools like Noodle Bibs and Turnitin. We didn't have those things before, right? Those are kind of new, or even as somebody mentioned, Office 365, or even the LMS, right? With technology now that we have the the learning management systems and online learning, that's completely different from the way it was, you know, 20, 30, 40 years ago. The other one too is more advanced technology, like assistive technologies. So we now here in our library, we have screen readers, we have Braille printers and things like that. And we didn't always have those things in other libraries before. So technology's really made some advances here in that area with more advanced technology. Again, you know, the 3D printers. I don't know how many of you have 3D printers in your library. Have you had to troubleshoot any of those? It's not just the Xerox machine anymore, right? And then teaching digital media literacy, as I talked about before, helping them understand not only information literacy, but also digital media literacy, to really look critically at media. And then also, you know, again, we have the one button studio, and we have sometimes our reference staff end up having to go assist and troubleshoot. We do have a staff position for that, but that person's not always on duty. And so sometimes the reference librarians have to step up and help as well. So again, the development of even having a digital media specialist, that's new. And, you know, 20, 30 years ago, we didn't even have that kind of position in the library, right? So we have new positions that have come as a result of technology. And then finally, I think, you know, we were talking about the supporting the changes to teaching and learning. So in the past, you know, we had the chalk and talk, or the lecture versus the active learning. So when we go back to that first image that we saw of the Alden Library, right? The one on the left was somebody just studying and reading a book or reading a newspaper, right? Because they went to their lecture and then they came back and they had to study that thing by themselves. Versus the picture on the right, where the students were doing group projects because the faculty member probably assigned them a group project, right? So we didn't always have that in the past, especially, you know, the group projects that were using technology. I mentioned competency-based learning. If you're not aware of that, you might want to dig into that a little bit more in terms of what that's going to mean for shifts in curriculum and mindset overall. So it's really a change from us as educators delivering and measuring if we've delivered the curriculum to this is what the student is going to be able to do. And they may not get there, you know, in 15 weeks. It's just they have to master that. So that's really what it's at. It's not as much time bound. They're struggling with that because obviously there has to be some parameters set for financial aid purposes and other things. But true competency-based learning is all about the mastery of a skill or a concept and not necessarily about the teaching piece. So it's a shift from the teacher to the learner. So I think we're going to see a little bit more of that. And how is that affecting us in the library? Again, so we have students who have to be able to master things, right, rather than just study for a test. So that's a little different mindset that it can affect us. And then the stackable credentials and micro credentials. So I know particularly in the community colleges, so if there's anyone here on from a community college, you'll probably know what I'm talking about, where folks will start in the non-credit sector in doing maybe even a certificate program, and they will take the main courses there and then decide that they want to back that into an associate degree. So then they go do the general education requirements and they end up with an AS degree or an AAS degree. And then they decide from there they want to move on to a bachelor's degree. And in the middle of it, they might stop out and get a Microsoft certification or a MOOC, complete a MOOC or something like that. So those are sort of stackable credentials, and breaking them down so that the diploma, the full bachelor's degree diploma, isn't the main vehicle that we're looking at, that we're looking at more discrete learning pieces. And that can change a lot of how we handle our collections, I would think, in terms of the breadth and the depth of the collections. And then finally, the changing delivery models. I recently heard a new term that I had not heard before called bisynchronous. And this is really, I think, as a result of the pandemic, because some of the earlier pilots had not worked so successfully. But in the bisynchronous model, what that means is it's online learning, but it's online and half of it's on your own time, asynchronous, and half of it is using a web-based video conferencing tool like Zoom or Teams, Microsoft Teams, or some other one, whatever you have, WebEx or any of them. And so the course is a hybrid course that is in both of those ways, delivered in both those ways. So we call it bisynchronous. And again, that's a pretty new term. The one that's really hot right now, and there may be on some of your campuses, is HyFlex. And that one is when we have faculty who are in a face-to-face class and they are streaming it live, and at the same time they're recording it so that students who are not attending class can view it later. And the idea of it is that the student can choose how they want to attend class on any given session or any given day. And that has shown a lot of good retention increases, but at the same time, it's really technology laden and hard to support in terms of the faculty. There's a lot of faculty professional development there. So, but what does that mean again in terms of how we're going to support some of these newer models coming out as a library? So I know one of the things that we're seeing here is that we have students who are both face-to-face and who might be doing a bisynchronous class at the same time. And if they're doing that, they don't have a space to go between classes. So they come to the library. You'll see them come to the library, go into a group study room, and actually take the live virtual part of their class via Zoom or Teams in the library group study rooms. So just as another way to sort of support our learners. So again, just wanted to wrap up here is looking through the crystal ball. What do you see next? You know, put something in the chat, whatever we not talked about today, and technology, related to technology, and as it's going to affect academic libraries in the future. Is there anything that we haven't hit upon, or anything else you want to share with the group? So we've got the chat, or feel free to unmute and share too. I hope I haven't bored you all to death. Well, if there are no other thoughts, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Here's my contact information below, and I will be happy to have further conversations with you at any time. So I thank you all today for attending. It's great to see my Pennsylvania friends again, and I hope to see you again soon.